Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. Reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a retired federal worker and proud of it. Today is June 20th. I haven't done a show for a month, but it has been a month just filled with all kinds of things that have happened and happened and happened and happened. Entire major issues have broken out and then after that been completely forgotten. So I'll try to run down those very, very quickly. Please note that you'll be watching the show, if you watch it at all, probably next Tuesday or Wednesday of this coming week, or the week after that, or the week after that, or the week after that. Basically, this show from June 20th will be on for the next month. So you will be looking through a time capsule back into the past. The past that is for me, June 20th, and for you is ridiculously irrelevant. And that is what the problem is when I talk about current events. Because current events aren't very current when they've already happened and new things have happened. So if I had done this show 2 weeks ago, I'd probably be talking about the release of Bowe Bergdahl and how his family was dragged through the mud and his father called a Islamic sympathizer because he grew a beard in memoriam of his son who was captured. His co-workers, he walked away from his base for one reason or another, possibly, according to one source, because his sergeant told him that it was okay as long as he didn't bring his gun and was completely unarmed. So it's hard to say what he was up to. Some people think he was visiting his friends on the Afghan side of the same post. Others, his detractors say he was deserting and going over to the Taliban side, and that was in Afghanistan over there. So he's released. We have no POWs anywhere in the world as far as I know. We do have some civilians that were captured in Pakistan, but no POWs at all. Not in Iraq and not in Afghanistan. Well, that's pretty good news. Although everybody came up and started talking about what a horrible scandal it was that 5 people from Guantanamo were given up in return for some guy who is this and that. It was a traitor and a deserter and a horrible person. In Bowe's defense, he escaped from the Taliban 3 times. He was put in a cage. He was psychologically tortured, and I don't know whether some of these people are happy or unhappy, but I think that he's been suffered enough to be allowed to leave. But it's kind of ironic that the supposedly pro-military Republican Party, just because it's a possible victory for Obama, basically broke the number one tenet of military service, and that is good or bad, ill or liked or disliked, no man, no Marine, no soldier, no sailor is ever left behind. So this kind of came. It swirled up. They had hearings. Everybody was all upset. It dominated Fox News for a while. The talk show guys were talking about it. They canceled the Welcome Home Bowe celebration in his home state of, I believe it was Idaho. And then all of a sudden it disappeared. And there was another scandal that occurred. The other kind of, is it a victory? Could be. The guy responsible for killing the ambassador in Benghazi, Libya, which is right about here, was captured by special forces and brought home. Do I hear anybody excited and happy about it? Not really. Oh, look at the timing. It's just terrible, blah, blah, blah. What are they trying to do? Are they trying to convince us that they're doing a good job? How dare they? So that, came up, and that's already gone off. And why has it gone off the sites? Why has it gone off everybody's view? Why is it outside of the echo chamber? Because there's a real crisis going on, and it is major. Right up here is Iraq. Right over here is Syria. We chose not to go into Syria. Syria gassed some of the rebels a few months ago, or I think it was a year ago. Everybody was ganging up on the Obama administration. Why don't we do something about it? Let's go in there. Let's bomb somebody. Let's put soldiers on the ground. Let's take over Libya for democracy. Let's kick out. Assad, the dictator, and let's replace him with the good guys, whoever they are. And it ends up that half of the rebels are the good guys, but the other 2/3, maybe a third of the rebels are the good guys. The other 2/3 are two extremist Al-Qaeda type groups, jihadis, and one of which is al-Nusra that everybody was worried about. Here's Syria over here. And the other one is the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or Iraq and the Levant, since the Arabic word al-Shams means both the Levant and Syria. It's hard to say whether the English language initials are ISIS, which is ironic because if anybody watches the TV network FX, they have a cartoon called Archer, and on Archer works for an inept secret spy group called ISIS. So I'm sure that came years before anybody knew that there was a Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. However, since this has been going on, first of all, what is happening over there? Well, what's been happening is just incredible and really kind of sad. I'm going to make this larger. And here is Iraq. So here is Iraq over here, and there's the Persian Gulf. Here's Baghdad, here's Kirkuk, and over here is Syria. So basically, there's this group called ISIS. They've been fighting in Syria, and they took over this part of Syria. And their opponents are the Free Syrian Army, which is over here around Aleppo, and down here in Homs. They got thrown out of Homs. And over here is probably the main area of Assad's control, especially his Alawites friends up here. Basically, the moderate Sunnis or the moderate radical Sunni Syrians jumped on ISIS because even the ISIS was too radical even for Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda's affiliate is called al-Nusra. We were worried that al-Nusra was going to get hold of American weapons, which is why Obama hasn't been pouring American weapons in there. Truly, if he had been, they'd be in the hands of ISIS. But he hadn't. However, Turkey has, and Saudi Arabia has, and those have been getting into the hands of this group. This group called ISIS has $2 billion in liquid cash assets. On top of that, so they came in, and in the last week, they took the giant city of Mosul, which is up here, city of about 1 million people, the largest city in the Sunni part of Iraq, and basically also has Turkomans and used to have a lot of Assyrian Christians, but they escaped a long time ago and live mostly in Europe and the U.S. So this area here was overrun all of a sudden by this group that came out of nowhere. And then they started coming up toward Baghdad and toward Kirkuk. Now, this area in here, and the northern part of Iraq and kind of the northeast, and there's some parts of Syria that also have some of them, is the Kurdish area. Their army is called the Peshmerga, and they have a autonomous area that's virtually like its own country. And they've been wanting Kirkuk for a while. What happened over here in the whole Sunni part of Iraq is the army collapsed completely. A few hundred fighters for this ISIS group apparently took over a swath of Iraq that we had secured 5 years ago that is literally this large. All the way over here. Tel Afar on the border, all the way to Mosul, which is a big city to take over. And now they're coming in over here. They're besieging a big refinery that refines most of the diesel and the gasoline for the country of Iraq. Most of the Iraqis live down here, and they're mostly Shiites. The Sunnis live out here, and the Kurds live over here. So two things have happened in the last couple days. First of all, the city of Baqaba, the army pulled itself together mostly with Shiite militias and stopped the ISIS attacks. And over here, the Kurds expanded their area by about a third and took over Kirkuk, took over a big oil field and a small refinery, and now basically have all of this part of Iraq. And they took over a border with Syria, and now they have direct communications with the Kurds that have a little area of Syria now that Syria has fallen apart. So what caused this? What really caused this? Well, what really caused it, what ultimately really caused it is that we overthrew Saddam Hussein, who was a Sunni, but a Sunni secular person. So the Ba'ath Party was basically a secular party. It was socialist, almost national socialist, and I won't go into what that implies, but was a very, very strict socialist state with a very strong intelligence. It was one of these kind of East German type of things where every other person is spying on every other person and basically trying to keep the 12 million or 15 million Shiites under control, who basically are almost the entire population from Basra all the way up to most of Baghdad, especially the eastern part. So the Shiites, when we took over and overthrew Saddam, instead of just leaving the army as it is and just changing out the regime and getting rid of Saddam's family and putting some other family who might be a little more pro-American. Rumsfeld, who I've said before is the worst Secretary of Defense probably in recent American history, and probably the worst Secretary of Defense, let's just say it, in history. Just an absolute, everything he did from procurement to the war in Iraq to not catching Osama bin Laden, all is at his feet. He had a theory of warfare that was just outrightly stupid, that most of the generals didn't have the guts to tell him to just shut up and go home, and not to tell his ally, who is Vice President Cheney, that this guy is destroying our military and destroying our faith in ourselves. So He appointed a guy to be the provisional head of Iraq, the provisional government, which was the CPA, Coalition Provisional Authority, which basically took over Iraq as an occupation force and fired the entire army, all of the civil servants, everybody who knew anything about running anything in Iraq, fired everybody who worked for who kept the electricity on, who worked in the hospitals, just destroyed the entire infrastructure of Iraq. And most of the leaders were the Sunni Arabs and the Sunni intellectuals and the Sunni educated people. So they all joined one insurgent group after another. So within a year, there was a revolution against us in Fallujah and then Ramadi, which are places in the Sunni part of Iraq. Next thing you know, we were fighting tooth and nail. We had to vastly increase our soldiers there. We were losing soldiers left and right on what was supposed to be a cakewalk where they just loved us. All because the initial approach was just so incredibly stupid. Then came Petraeus in 2006, 7, and 8. They fired all of the generals that looked up to Rumsfeld. They fired Rumsfeld. This was even during the end of the Bush administration. They got in Secretary of Defense Gates, who's a pretty responsible Secretary of Defense, got us not IED-proof trucks, but more IED-proof than the completely undefended Jeeps, which was basically what they were driving before, Humvees in this case. And then what happened is they basically had to retake Iraq. Because Shiite militias were taking over in large swaths of the Shiite area right here, and Sunni militias were taking over here. Many of whom, if you might remember, a guy named al-Zarqawi, who was head of the AQI, which was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia, Aqim. And we hunted him down and killed him. And then there was a guy named al-Masri who we hunted down and killed and captured, who took over after them. And basically, Petraeus got together with the Sunni tribes and created the Renaissance groups that overthrew al-Qaeda. Meanwhile, we made an agreement with al-Sistani, who was the great imam or Ayatollah of Iraq, against al-Sadr, who had his own militias, Iranian-backed militias. And they fought a gigantic battle in Baghdad, which is probably one of the great, I think it'll go down as one of the great battles in history, even though eventually it all came to naught, where they basically walled off piece by piece the city, pacified that piece, then walled off another piece, and so on and so forth, and basically fought both of the sets of militias, the Shiite militias and the Sunni militias, to a standstill, and basically called for elections, and that's how al-Maliki took over. And al-Maliki is the prime minister since 2006. He was elected while we were there, and he stayed in power ever since, even after we got up and left. And the reason we got up and completely left is not because Obama's weak or anything like that. If we have an agreement in a country, I was in Germany for a while, we have a status of forces agreement, and basically we follow our own law on our own basis and with our own personnel, even while overseas. And al-Maliki said, no, we don't want that, and we don't really want your advisors, so go home. And to his surprise, Obama said, boy, that's what I really wanted in the first place. So we've basically been out of there since 2011. Meanwhile, we were trying to put together an agreement so that the three sections of Iraq, the three giant populations, the Kurds, 5 million, the Sunnis, 6 million, and the remainder mostly Shiites, about 15 or 16 million. There's another million other minorities, would basically control their own regions, share the oil revenue, and then there'd be a central government in Baghdad under the control of whoever got elected. And since 60% of the voters in Iraq are Shiites, it's probably going to be a Shiite. But he's supposed to pull together a multi-ethnic cabinet with, the Speaker of the House being this and the Vice President being that, and so on and so forth. Al-Maliki basically ruled as a sectarian, and it's really been getting worse and worse. One of the Sunni regular politicians and the head of one of the Sunni parties was executed, and another one was arrested. So it just got worse and worse. And all the moderate Sunnis just felt they were out of it. They weren't getting any money from the central government or from the oil wealth. And when ISIS came in, basically, ironically, run out of parts of Syria so that they had fighters available. 2 or 3 different Sunni groups joined up with ISIS. So it wasn't just a few hundred super jihadist fighters collapsing the Iraqi army. No, the tribal council of the Sunni tribes were with them, and there are about 2 or 3 groups that represent large swaths of the Sunnis, and they all joined together with this completely insane radical group that crucifies people in Syria in order to run the Shiite, what they claim is the Shiite army, out of Iraq. So this leaves Obama in a pretty tough position. The Republicans are jumping all over him, saying, well, this is because you left Iraq. You lost Iraq now. And basically, they lost Iraq within 6 months after the initial invasion under Bush. Fortunately, under Secretary of Defense Gates and the last part of the Bush administration and the first part of the Obama administration, they did a pretty good job of stabilizing the country, leaving an elected leader behind, good or bad, and leaving with honor, withdrawing with honor. Not a win, but not a complete loss. Now this has happened, and it's a question of whether the honor is still there. However, the Republicans have said that al-Maliki is a tool of Iran, which he is, and that's Obama's fault. And and they're pushing him to actually start bombing, to basically make our Air Force into al-Maliki's Air Force. And Petraeus has come out. Petraeus, the guy that actually stabilized and won a phase of the war between 2006 and 2011. And he's come out and said, you cannot make America al-Maliki's Air Force. If you do, you've not only lost the Sunnis in Iraq, you probably lost the moderates in Syria, and you probably lose the support of the Sunnis everywhere else, which is basically the mainstream of the Middle East. So Obama's in a tough position. He just sent 375 Marines to the embassy in Baghdad. And he sent another 300 special forces to set up what he calls intelligence bases. Now, are those going to be drone headquarters? Are those going to be just gathering intelligence? Will they organize the Kurds to attack ISIS in the rear, or to have these other Sunni groups overthrow ISIS from inside? I don't know. But he's doing his best, and we have a mess. Thank you very much. My name is Reed Silverne. Name of the show is Fed Pride. Thanks.